Your son saved my life? A stranger knocks on a poor single dad's door with a briefcase full of money. But when gratitude turns into danger and hidden secrets unravel, how far will a desperate father go to protect his son and keep hope alive? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun barely peeked through the threadbare curtains of the Miller home as Jacob stood in the cramped kitchen, the toaster letting out its familiar burnt smell. His calloused fingers pulled out the blackened bread, scraping it hurriedly with a butter knife. The ancient appliance had only 2 settings these days, raw or cremated. "Sorry about the toast again, son," Jacob called out, his voice rough from lack of sleep. The kitchen walls, once a cheerful yellow that Sarah had picked out, now showed water stains and peeling paint. He glanced at the pile of unpaid bills on the counter, their red, final notice stamps seeming to glow in the dim morning light. Ethan trudged into the kitchen, his dark hair messy from sleep. Despite the worn-out clothes and the bags under his eyes, his smile remained bright. "It's okay, Dad. I'm getting used to the extra crunch." Jacob watched as his son sat down at their small kitchen table, the wood scratched and wobbling on uneven legs. The boy's sneakers caught his attention. The sole was coming loose on the left one, and duct tape peeked out from the side. "Those shoes," Jacob began, his throat tightening. "They're fine, Dad." Ethan cut in quickly, but his eyes told a different story. "Just need a little more tape, that's all." Jacob poured the instant coffee into his chipped mug, the granules refusing to dissolve completely. "Did you finish your homework?" "Yeah." Ethan picked at his burnt toast, his voice dropping slightly. But some kids were laughing yesterday about my shoes and this old jacket." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. He gripped the counter, his knuckles turning white. "I'm sorry, son. Next paycheck." "Don't worry about it," Ethan interrupted, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "Besides, Marcus said his brother got teased way worse when he wore the same shirt 3 days in a row." Jacob checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. His shift at Pete's Auto Shop started at 7:30, and he couldn't afford to be late again. "I've got to run. You okay getting to school?" "Always am." Ethan stood up, shouldering his worn backpack. "Maybe we can watch that old movie tonight? The one Mom used to love?" The mention of Sarah made Jacob's chest ache. "Sure, buddy, if I'm not too late. Got to talk to the bank after work, but I'll try." The drive to work in his rusted pickup truck was quiet, except for the concerning rattle in the engine that Jacob didn't have time or money to fix. Pete's Auto Shop came into view, a sprawling garage with peeling paint and oil stains that had become more of a home than their actual house these days. The day passed in a blur of oil changes, brake repairs, and the constant worry gnawing at his gut. During his lunch break, Jacob counted the cash in his wallet for the 10th time, barely enough for groceries, let alone new shoes for Ethan. At 5 p.m., Jacob wiped his hands on his already stained uniform and headed to the First National Bank. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he sat across from Mr. Thompson, watching the bank manager's face grow increasingly stern. "Mr. Miller," Thompson said, shuffling papers with manicured hands. "You're 3 months behind on your mortgage payments. We've been very patient, but—" "I know," Jacob interrupted, hating how his voice cracked. "I picked up extra shifts. I'm trying to catch up." "Trying isn't enough." Thompson's voice was flat. "Without a substantial payment by the end of the month, we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings." The word foreclosure echoed in Jacob's head as he drove home. The house might be falling apart, but it was where Sarah had raised Ethan, where she'd painted the kitchen yellow, where she'd hung Christmas lights even when they couldn't afford presents. He found Ethan at the kitchen table, homework spread out before him, the old DVD of Sarah's favorite movie waiting hopefully nearby. Jacob's heart sank. He'd completely forgotten about their movie plans. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said, his smile tired but genuine. "How was the bank?" Jacob couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. Not yet. "Let's get you to bed, buddy. It's getting late." In Ethan's small bedroom, Jacob watched as his son climbed into bed, the springs creaking beneath him. The walls still had the solar system decals Sarah had put up years ago, though most of the planets had lost their glow-in-the-dark shine. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was small in the darkness. "Are we going to be okay?" Jacob tucked the thin blanket around his son's shoulders, remembering how Sarah used to do it. "Course we are. Get some sleep." He waited until Ethan's breathing evened out before sinking to his knees beside the bed. In the quiet darkness, Jacob closed his eyes, his hands clasped tightly. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I don't know what to do anymore. I need, just please, send us something, anything." The only response was the distant sound of traffic and the perpetual drip from the leaky bathroom faucet. Jacob remained there, on his knees, praying for a miracle he wasn't sure he deserved anymore. Thunder cracked across the dark sky as rain pelted against the windows of the Miller home. Jacob slouched on their worn couch, his work clothes still on, grease stains visible on his shirt sleeve. The evening news flickered on their old TV, its sound barely audible over the storm. His eyes felt heavy after another 14-hour workday, the weight of the bank's rejection still fresh in his mind. The living room showed signs of better days. Faded family photos hung crooked on the walls, and Sarah's favorite throw blanket, now thin and patched, still draped over the back of the couch. Jacob pulled it closer, breathing in the lingering scent of home that somehow remained after all these years. His chin dropped to his chest as exhaustion won over. The TV's blue light danced across his weathered face, highlighting the new wrinkles that seemed to appear daily. In his half-sleep, memories of Sarah's laugh mixed with the sound of the rain. Bang, bang, bang. The sudden pounding at the front door jolted Jacob awake. He sat up straight, his heart racing. The clock on the wall showed 11:42 p.m. "Who in the world?" he muttered, pushing himself up from the couch. His joints protested the movement after too many hours bent over car engines. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. Lightning flashed as Jacob approached the door, illuminating the shabby entryway. Through the window's sheer curtain, he could make out a figure standing on his porch, shoulders hunched against the wind and rain. Jacob's hand hesitated on the door handle. In their neighborhood, late-night visitors rarely brought good news, but something in the desperate rhythm of the knocking made him turn the handle. The door creaked open to reveal a man completely drenched from the storm. Water dripped from his expensive-looking suit, now plastered to his thin frame. His face was pale, almost ghost-like in the porch light. Both hands clutched a battered leather briefcase to his chest, as if it were a lifeline. "Can I help you?" Jacob asked, keeping one hand on the doorframe. The stranger's wide eyes darted past him, scanning the living room before settling back on Jacob's face. Lightning illuminated the scene again, and Jacob noticed the man's hands were shaking. Not just from the cold, there was fear in those trembling fingers. "Is this—" the stranger's voice cracked. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Is this where Ethan Miller lives?" Jacob's protective instincts flared. "Who's asking about my son?" Thunder boomed overhead, making the stranger jump. His knuckles whitened around the briefcase handle. "Please, I have to. I need to." He struggled to form complete sentences, water running down his face. "Look, mister," Jacob said firmly, "it's late, and I don't know who you are. If you need help—" "Your son," the man interrupted, his voice suddenly clear and urgent. "Your son saved my life." Jacob blinked, confused. "What are you talking about?" The stranger thrust the briefcase forward with such force that Jacob automatically took it. The weight surprised him. It was much heavier than it looked. "Please," the man said, already backing away from the door. "It's yours now, all of it. Tell him thank you." Before Jacob could respond, the stranger turned and ran down the porch steps, disappearing into the curtain of rain. The storm swallowed him up as if he'd never been there at all. Jacob stood in the doorway, rain splattering his face, the heavy briefcase cold and wet in his hands. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating the empty street. He stared into the darkness, completely baffled by what had just happened. "What in the world?" he whispered to himself, looking down at the mysterious case in his hands. Jacob's hands trembled as he placed the mysterious briefcase on the scratched kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a dim yellow glow over the worn leather case. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rain drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. "Dad?" Ethan stood in the doorway wearing his faded blue pajamas, his dark hair tousled from sleep. "What's going on?" "I heard knocking." Jacob ran a calloused hand through his graying hair. "Someone just dropped this off," said. He paused, studying his son's concerned face. "Said something about you." Ethan moved closer, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "About me? What do you mean?" "He said you saved his life." Jacob's fingers traced the brass latches of the briefcase. "But I've never seen him before. Have you?" Ethan shook his head, his expression puzzled. "No, I don't think so." He pulled out a kitchen chair, the legs scraping against the linoleum floor. "What's in it?" Jacob took a deep breath, his heart pounding against his ribs. With careful movements, he released the latches. They clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet kitchen. He lifted the lid slowly, half expecting something terrible to jump out. Both father and son gasped. Stacks of crisp $100 bills filled the briefcase. bound neatly with paper bands. The money seemed to glow under the kitchen light, almost unreal in its abundance. Ethan reached out to touch one of the bundles, but pulled his hand back quickly, as if the bills might burn his fingers. "Oh my God," Ethan whispered. "Dad, how much is there?" Jacob's hand shook as he lifted one of the stacks. The paper felt real enough, the texture, the weight. He'd handled enough cash at the garage to know genuine bills. These weren't counterfeits, at least not obvious ones. "This can't be right," Jacob muttered, more to himself than to Ethan. "This has to be some kind of setup." He began counting quickly through one stack, his mechanic's fingers leaving slight smudges on the pristine bills. Each stack looks like $10,000. And there must be. He did a quick count, at least 20 stacks. $200,000? Ethan's voice cracked. But why would someone just give us this much money? Jacob's mind raced with possibilities. None of them good. Drug money. Stolen cash. A trap. His protective instincts kicked in as he looked at his son's wide-eyed expression. "We need to call the police." "No." Ethan's outburst surprised them both. "Dad, wait. Remember what the man said? About me saving his life?" Jacob's brow furrowed. "What aren't you telling me, son?" Ethan shifted in his chair, suddenly finding the floor very interesting. I've been volunteering at the crisis hotline, after school, twice a week." "The what?" Jacob felt his stomach drop. "Since when?" "About 6 months now." Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "I wanted to help people, like Mom used to." The mention of his late wife made Jacob's chest tighten. Sarah had been a counselor, always reaching out to others in need. He could see so much of her in Ethan's gentle nature. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jacob asked softly. "I didn't want you to worry." Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening. "And I thought you might say no. But Dad, we help people. Really help them. Maybe that man, the one who came tonight, maybe he was someone I talked to?" Jacob stared at the money, then at his son, his mind wrestling with the situation. The mortgage was 3 months behind. Ethan needed new shoes, school supplies, so many things he couldn't provide. This money could change everything. But the risk, the danger. Thunder boomed outside, making them both jump. Jacob quickly closed the briefcase, his decision made. "Help me with this," he said, standing up. "We need to hide it until we figure out what to do." They carried the briefcase to Jacob's bedroom, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet. Together, they slid it under his bed, pushing it far back against the wall. "Ethan," Jacob gripped his son's shoulders, looking him straight in the eyes. "Listen to me carefully. You can't tell anyone about this. Not your friends, not your teachers, no one. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "I promise, Dad." "Good." Jacob pulled him into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his son's shampoo. "Now get some sleep. We've got a lot to think about tomorrow." After Ethan left, Jacob lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling as lightning occasionally illuminated the room. The briefcase seemed to pulse beneath him like a second heartbeat. His mind cycled through endless scenarios, some hopeful, others terrifying. The money could save their home, give Ethan a real future. But at what cost? What strings were attached to this unexpected gift? The stranger's words echoed in his head. "Your son saved my life." Was it really that simple? Sleep refused to come. As the storm gradually died down outside, Jacob remained awake, caught between overwhelming relief and gut-wrenching fear, while the briefcase full of money lay hidden beneath his bed like a ticking time bomb. Morning sunlight streamed through the cracked kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Jacob sat at the table, surrounded by a sea of overdue bills, each stamped with angry red letters. His weathered hands carefully counted out crisp bills from the briefcase, still hardly believing they were real. The electric company's notice, $340, $2.86, paid. The mortgage payment, $156, paid. The credit card bill that had been keeping him up at night, $789.43, paid. One by one, Jacob stuffed payments into envelopes, each sealed with trembling fingers. "Dad?" Ethan's voice came from the hallway. He stood there in his worn pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. "Are you okay?" Jacob managed a small smile. "Better than okay, son. Get dressed. We're going shopping before school." At Foot Locker, Ethan's eyes widened at the wall of pristine sneakers. He'd grown used to thrift store finds and hand-me-downs, learning early not to ask for new things. "Really, Dad? Are you sure?" "Try these on," Jacob said, handing him a pair of Nike basketball shoes, the kind Ethan had been eyeing through store windows for months. The price tag made Jacob wince out of habit, but for once, He pushed the worry aside. Ethan slipped them on, his face lighting up. They fit perfect. He stood, bouncing on his toes, examining his reflection in the mirror. The old, scuffed shoes he'd been wearing sat discarded, their holes and worn soles a stark reminder of their struggles. "We'll take them," Jacob told the sales clerk, pulling out crisp bills. The simple transaction felt surreal. No mental math, no checking his account balance, no quiet dread. In the car afterward, Ethan kept looking down at his new shoes. A genuine smile spread across his face. It was a smile Jacob hadn't seen in too long, the kind that reached his eyes and dimpled his cheeks, just like his mother's used to. "Thanks, Dad," Ethan said softly. "These are amazing." Jacob's throat tightened. "You deserve them, son. I'm sorry it took so long." The day passed in a blur of errands and bill payments. Jacob called in sick to his afternoon job for the first time in years, using the time to catch up on house repairs he'd been putting off. He fixed the leaky faucet that had been driving them crazy for months, replaced the burnt-out porch light, and even bought groceries, real groceries, not just the bare necessities. That evening, Jacob prepared a proper dinner: chicken, fresh vegetables, and actual bread from the bakery instead of the day-old discount rack. The kitchen filled with warm, homey aromas that reminded him of better times. As they sat down to eat, Jacob studied his son's face. Something had been nagging at him all day. "Ethan, about that man last night." Ethan looked up from his plate, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. "Yeah? He said you saved his life." Jacob watched carefully as confusion crossed Ethan's features. "But you didn't recognize him?" Ethan set his fork down, his shoulders tensing slightly. "No, I didn't. I've never seen him before." "Are you sure?" "Think carefully." Ethan pushed his peas around his plate, avoiding his father's gaze. "Well," he hesitated, then took a deep breath. "There's something I haven't told you." Jacob leaned forward, his dinner forgotten. "What is it?" "I've been volunteering at the Community Crisis Hotline." The words came out in a rush. "After school, twice a week. I told you I was doing extra math tutoring, but..." He trailed off, looking guilty. Jacob blinked, surprised. "The Crisis Hotline? But you're only 15. How did they..." "Mrs. Peterson runs it, you know, from church." She made an exception because she said I have a good way with words. Ethan's voice grew stronger as he continued. "We take calls from people who are struggling, who need someone to talk to. Everything's anonymous. We never know their names, and they don't know ours." A memory stirred in Jacob's mind. Ethan coming home one evening a few weeks ago, quiet and thoughtful. There was someone specific, wasn't there? Ethan nodded slowly. "About 3 weeks ago, a man called late in the evening." Ethan swallowed hard. He was planning to end his life that night. He'd lost everything: his job, his family. He felt worthless. Jacob's heart clenched, thinking of the stranger's words. "Your son saved my life." "We talked for almost 2 hours, Ethan continued. "I mostly just listened. Told him about Mom, how losing her hurt so bad, but how we kept going. How sometimes just holding on one more day takes more courage than anything else." His voice grew quiet. He was crying when he hung up, but he promised he'd call a counselor the next day. Jacob stared at his son, seeing him in a new light. This sensitive, compassionate young man, who spent his free time helping strangers step back from the edge. When had Ethan grown into this person? While Jacob had been working himself to exhaustion, trying to keep their heads above water, his son had been quietly saving lives. "Why didn't you tell me about the hotline?" Jacob asked softly. Ethan shrugged, looking down at his plate. "I didn't want you to worry. You already have so much to deal with, and I know money's been tight. The volunteer work, it makes me feel like I'm doing something important, you know? Like Mom would be proud." Jacob reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. "She would be more than proud, Ethan. I'm proud." His mind wandered to the briefcase upstairs, to the desperate man on their doorstep the night before. The pieces were starting to fit together. The Community Crisis Center occupied a small brick building wedged between a laundromat and a convenience store. Jacob's old pickup truck rattled into the narrow parking lot, its brakes squealing as he pulled into a spot. He glanced at Ethan in the passenger seat, noticing how his son's shoulders tensed. "You don't have to be nervous," Jacob said, turning off the engine. "I just want to understand what happened." Ethan nodded, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his new blue t-shirt. "I know, Dad. It's just, I was supposed to keep it secret. They're big on confidentiality here." The morning sun beat down on them as they walked to the entrance. A small bell chimed as Jacob pushed open the glass door, releasing a burst of cool, air-conditioned breeze. The lobby was modest, but welcoming. with soft beige walls and motivational posters. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from the reception desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her smile warm and professional. "Yes, ma'am," Jacob replied, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "My son volunteers here, and I'd like to speak with the director if possible." The woman's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, you must be Ethan's father. I'm Sarah, the morning coordinator. Dr. Matthews is in her office. She'll be thrilled to meet you." They followed Sarah down a short hallway lined with more inspirational artwork. She knocked on a door marked director and poked her head in. "Linda? Ethan Miller and his father are here." Dr. Linda Matthews was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She stood up from behind her desk, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "Ethan, what a wonderful surprise. Please, both of you, come in." The office was small but tidy, with certificates on the walls and a small potted plant on the windowsill. Jacob and Ethan settled into two chairs facing the desk. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Matthews began, "your son is one of our most gifted volunteers. I hope you're not here because of any concerns." Jacob shifted in his chair. "Actually, I only just learned about his volunteering. I was hoping you could tell me more about what he does here." Dr. Matthews glanced at Ethan, who gave a small nod. "Well, with proper training and supervision, our youth volunteers man the crisis hotline. They provide a sympathetic ear and often connect deeply with callers who might be hesitant to speak with adults." She reached for a folder on her desk. "In fact, we had a remarkable situation just last week. Ethan, would you mind if I shared this with your father?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded again. "A man called late one night, clearly in crisis. He'd lost everything. His job, his savings, his sense of purpose. He was." "Doctor?" Matthews paused, choosing her words carefully, considering drastic actions. Jacob's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he listened. "The call lasted over 2 hours," Dr. Matthews continued. "Our volunteer, Ethan, spoke with such genuine compassion. He shared his own experience of loss, of feeling hopeless after his mother passed away." She smiled softly at Ethan. He told the caller how even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives we never see. How everyone has the power to make a difference, even when they feel powerless. Ethan stared at his hands, his cheeks flushed. Jacob felt his throat tighten with emotion. By the end of the call, Dr. Matthews said, the man had completely changed his perspective. He promised to keep living, to find a way to help others despite his own struggles. It was one of the most powerful conversations I've ever witnessed in my 15 years here. Jacob looked at his son with new eyes. This thoughtful, compassionate young man who saved lives while he wasn't looking. When had Ethan grown so wise? The caller asked for Ethan's name, Dr. Matthews added. Of course, we never reveal that information, but he insisted on leaving a message. She pulled a note from the folder. He said, "Tell the young man who spoke to me that he didn't just save my life. He showed me how to live it again. Someday, I'll find a way to repay this debt." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. The stranger on his doorstep, wild-eyed in the rain, the briefcase full of money, the desperate declaration, "Your son saved my life." "Mr. Miller, are you all right?" Dr. Matthews asked, concern in her voice. "You've gone quite pale." Jacob forced a smile. "Yes, sorry. It's just, I'm very proud of my son." They thanked Dr. Matthews and walked back to the truck in silence. Jacob's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The timing matched. The gratitude in the stranger's voice, the way he disappeared into the night like a man with shadows at his heels. Sitting in the truck, Jacob felt a complicated mix of emotions wash over him. Pride in his son's compassion, profound gratitude that Ethan had saved a life. But underneath it all, a gnawing dread took root in his stomach. What kind of man carries that much cash? Why leave it and run? The money that had seemed like such a blessing now felt heavier, darker, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He looked at Ethan, who was watching him with worried eyes. "Dad, what are you thinking?" Jacob started the truck, its familiar rumble matching the tumult in his chest. That briefcase hidden under his bed suddenly felt less like a miracle and more like a ticking bomb. The bell above Lou's diner chimed as Jacob pushed through the glass door, wiping sweat from his forehead. The lunch rush was in full swing, filling the small restaurant with the clatter of plates and the buzz of conversation. He'd been coming here for years. Same counter seat, same order of meatloaf special when he could afford it. "The usual, Jake?" Lou called from behind the counter, already reaching for a coffee pot. Jacob nodded, settling onto his favorite worn vinyl stool. "Thanks, Lou." He pulled a few crumpled bills from his wallet. New money from the briefcase, though no one would know the difference. The diner's weathered door chimed again. Two men in crisp, dark suits entered, looking as out of place as penguins in a chicken coop. They moved with quiet purpose, their shoes clicking against the checkered floor. Jacob kept his eyes on his coffee, but his ears strained to listen. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Lou greeted. "Take any seat you'd like." The taller man pulled out a small notebook. "Actually, we're hoping you could help us with something." His voice was smooth but carried an edge, like polished steel. "We're looking for information about a man who might have passed through here recently. Middle-aged, well-dressed, carrying a brown leather briefcase." Jacob's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Lots of folks come through here," Lou replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "Can't say I remember anyone specific like that." The shorter man stepped forward, his suit jacket pulling back to reveal a shoulder holster. "This would have been 3 days ago, during the storm, the briefcase island, of particular interest to our employer." The diner had grown quieter, other customers pretending not to listen while stealing glances at the suits. Jacob forced himself to take a slow sip of coffee, fighting to keep his hands steady. "You sure you fellas wouldn't like some coffee?" Lou offered, his friendly tone unchanged. "Best in town." "No thank you," the taller man said. He pulled something from his pocket, a business card, and placed it on the counter. "If you remember anything, please call this number. There's a substantial reward for information leading to the recovery of the briefcase." Jacob's stomach churned as he watched Lou pocket the card. The suits made their way around the diner, stopping at each table, asking the same questions. When they reached the counter, Jacob hunched over his coffee cup, praying they wouldn't notice how his hands shook. "Sir?" The taller man's voice came from right behind him. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Jacob turned slowly, meeting the man's cold gray eyes. "About what? Were you in town during the storm 3 nights ago?" "Yeah, like everyone else," Jacob shrugged, trying to channel the weariness he felt into appearing nonchalant. "Nasty night." The shorter man studied him intently. "Did you happen to see anyone unusual? Someone who might have been desperate?" "Just heard the thunder and rain," Jacob replied. "Stayed inside with my boy." They exchanged looks before the taller one handed Jacob a card identical to Lou's. "If you remember anything, call us, day or night." Jacob took the card with numb fingers, nodding. The suits thanked Lou and headed for the door. As they left, Jacob caught a fragment of their conversation. "Check the crisis center next." His appetite gone, Jacob left enough money to cover his barely touched lunch and hurried out. He needed to warn Ethan. The boy would be home from school soon, and they needed to talk. The afternoon crawled by at the garage where Jacob worked. Every car that pulled in made him jump, expecting to see dark suits emerging. By the time he got home, his nerves were frayed to breaking. Ethan sat at the kitchen table doing homework, looking up as Jacob burst through the door. "Dad, what's wrong?" Jacob threw all 3 deadbolts and checked the windows. "Pack a bag," he ordered. "Just in case." "What? Why?" Some men were asking questions in town today. Jacob's voice was tight. "About the briefcase. About the night of the storm." He checked another window. "They're looking for it, son, and they're not the kind of men who take no for an answer." Ethan's face paled. "What do we do?" Jacob slumped into a kitchen chair, the weight of their situation pressing down on his shoulders. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw the fear creeping into those young eyes. The same eyes that had sparked with joy just days ago when they'd bought new shoes. The same eyes that had given a stranger hope to keep living. Moving methodically through the house, Jacob checked every lock again. He pulled the curtains closed and moved the briefcase from under the bed to a loose floorboard in the hall closet. Finally, he sat back down across from Ethan. "This money," Jacob said quietly, "could cost us everything." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights sweeping across their curtained windows. Father and son sat in the growing darkness, the gravity of their situation settling around them like a heavy blanket. Jacob sat at his kitchen table late one night, the briefcase open before him. Stacks of crisp bills caught the dim light of his desk lamp. His weathered hands trembled as he counted out several bundles, carefully arranging them into smaller piles. "What are you doing, Dad?" Ethan's voice made him jump. His son stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. Jacob took a deep breath. "Come here, son." He pulled out a chair. "Remember Mrs. Henderson next door? The one whose husband passed last year?" Ethan nodded, sliding into the seat. "She's been having trouble paying her rent. I heard her crying on her porch yesterday." "That's right." Jacob picked up one of the smaller stacks. "I was thinking, If this money came to us through an act of kindness, maybe that's how we should use it. The next morning, Jacob walked to the church before his shift at the garage. Pastor Mike was examining the leaking roof, shaking his head at the water damage. "Morning, Pastor," Jacob called out. "Jacob, what brings you by so early?" Jacob pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Anonymous donation for the roof repairs. Someone wanted to help but didn't want recognition." Pastor Mike's eyes widened as he opened the envelope. This is exactly what we needed. The Lord does work in mysterious ways. That afternoon, Jacob slipped another envelope under Mrs. Henderson's door while she was out grocery shopping. Inside was enough for 6 months' rent and a note that read, "From a friend who cares." At the hospital, Jacob approached the billing department. "I'd like to pay off the Watson family's medical bills," he said quietly. "Their daughter's cancer treatments." The clerk looked surprised. That's quite a substantial amount, sir." "I know." Jacob placed the stack of bills on the counter. "Please keep it anonymous." Over the next few weeks, Jacob and Ethan watched their community transform. Mrs. Henderson started tending her garden again, humming as she planted fresh flowers. The church roof was fixed, and the sound of rain no longer echoed through the sanctuary during services. At the grocery store, Jacob overheard Mrs. Watson telling the cashier how an anonymous angel had paid their medical bills. "I can finally sleep at night," she said, wiping happy tears. One evening, Jacob came home to find Ethan cooking dinner, something he hadn't done since his mother passed. "Spaghetti and meatballs," Ethan announced proudly. "Mom's recipe." Jacob hung his jacket, throat tight with emotion. "Smells just like hers." They sat together at the kitchen table, twirling pasta on their forks. Ethan's face glowed with a contentment Jacob hadn't seen in years. "You know what Tommy Watson told me at school today?" Ethan said between bites. "His little sister's getting better. The doctors say the treatments are working." Jacob nodded, remembering the relief on Mrs. Watson's face. "That's wonderful news. And Mrs. Henderson gave me cookies she baked. Said she felt like baking for the first time in forever." Ethan grinned. "They were actually pretty good." A chuckle escaped Jacob's lips. Soon, both father and son were laughing. Real, genuine laughter that filled their small kitchen with warmth. "You know what, Dad?" Ethan said, eyes bright. "I think Mom would be proud of what we're doing." Jacob reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. For the first time since finding the briefcase, the weight of worry lifted from his shoulders. In its place was something lighter, sweeter, the joy of giving, of making a difference. They finished dinner, sharing stories about the small changes they'd noticed around town. The way people smiled more, held doors open, passed along kind gestures of their own. Their secret acts of generosity had planted seeds of hope that were beginning to bloom. As they cleared the dishes together, their laughter mingled with the clinking of plates. The kitchen, once a place of burnt toast and hurried meals, now felt like home again. Father and son moved in comfortable synchronization, their bond strengthening with each shared secret, each quiet act of kindness. Through the window, they could see Mrs. Henderson's garden glowing in the sunset, her newly planted flowers swaying in the evening breeze. The church steeple stood proud against the darkening sky, its roof solid and secure. Somewhere in town, a little girl was getting stronger, her family sleeping peacefully without the burden of medical debt. Jacob looked at his son, this remarkable boy who had saved a stranger's life with just his words, who now helped spread hope through their community. Ethan caught his eye and smiled, a smile so much like his mother's that it made Jacob's heart ache with love and pride. They settled on the couch, shoulders touching, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other completely. The mystery of the briefcase and its dangers still loomed, but for now, they had found something precious: purpose, connection, and the simple joy of doing good together. The spring morning dawned bright and clear as Jacob drove through town in his old pickup truck. At every stop, he noticed small changes blooming like flowers after a long winter. The Sanders family's beat-up minivan was finally running again. He'd slipped the repair bill payment to Joe's auto shop last week. Little Tommy Sanders waved from the passenger seat, his arm no longer in a cast thanks to the mysteriously paid medical bills. Outside the elementary school, fresh paint brightened the playground equipment. Jacob smiled, remembering how he'd left an envelope marked Park Fund in the PTA donation box. Children's laughter rang out as they swung higher than ever on the newly repaired swings. "Morning, Mr. Miller," Mrs. Thompson called from the school library steps. She balanced a stack of brand new books in her arms. "You wouldn't believe it. Someone donated enough money to replace all our worn-out classics. The kids are so excited." Jacob nodded, trying to hide his satisfaction. "That's wonderful news," he said simply. At the corner grocery store, old Mr. Jenkins wasn't fretting over his calculator anymore. The going out of business sign had disappeared from his window. Instead, fresh produce filled the displays, and the shelves were fully stocked. Jacob had made sure the elderly shopkeeper found an envelope containing exactly what he needed to pay off his suppliers. Ethan bounded down the sidewalk after school, his face glowing. "Dad, you should see what's happening. Remember Jenny Martinez? Her mom couldn't afford her asthma medicine, but now she can breathe properly again. And the church has a new roof. Pastor Dave was crying when he announced it on Sunday." Jacob's heart swelled as he watched his son's excitement. "That's something, isn't it?" "It's like magic," Ethan said, falling into step beside him. "But the good kind, you know? The kind that makes people's lives better." They walked past the community center where Ethan volunteered. A fresh coat of paint covered the graffiti, and new flowers brightened the entrance. Inside, they could hear the happy chaos of the after-school program, another recipient of an anonymous donation. "The whole town feels different," Ethan continued. "Like everyone's standing a little taller, smiling a little more." He looked up at his father with knowing eyes. "You're doing this, aren't you, Dad?" Jacob squeezed his son's shoulder. "We're doing it together, son. Your kindness started all this, that night on the hotline. I'm just following your example." At the diner, they sat in their usual booth. Sarah, their regular waitress, served them with an extra spring in her step. Last month, she'd found an envelope that covered her daughter's college application fees. "Your usual?" she asked, beaming. "Coffee's on the house today, Jacob. You two are my favorite customers." As they ate, Jacob watched the dinner crowd. Mrs. Wilson from the bakery chatted with the high school principal. Tom the mailman joked with a group of construction workers. The whole place hummed with a warmth that had been missing for too long. "It's not just the money," Ethan said quietly, pushing his empty plate aside. "It's like hope is catching. People are helping each other more. Did you see how Mr. Jenkins gave free groceries to the Williams family when their dad lost his job?" Jacob nodded. The briefcase's contents had started something bigger than themselves. Every act of kindness seemed to multiply, spreading through the community like ripples in a pond. Walking home in the sunset, they passed the newly repaired basketball court where teenagers played pickup games instead of hanging around the street corners. The community garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers, tended by volunteers who'd once been strangers to each other. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Ethan said suddenly. "Mom would be too." Jacob's throat tightened. "I'm proud of you too, son. More than you know." At home, Jacob noticed something white under the front door. His heart skipped a beat as he picked up the envelope. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "Dear anonymous friend, you'll never know what your kindness meant to us. When we couldn't afford Tommy's surgery, we were desperate. Now he can play baseball again, and his smile lights up our whole world. You've given us back our hope. Thank you isn't enough, but it's all we can offer. With grateful hearts, the Sanders family." Jacob's hands trembled as he read the note. Ethan peered over his shoulder, and they stood together in the warm evening light, sharing a moment of pure joy. "We did good, didn't we, Dad?" Ethan whispered. Jacob pulled his son close, the thank you note crinkling between them. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The weight of their secret seemed lighter, balanced by the knowledge of all the good it had brought. "Yeah, son," he said softly. "We did good." The school gymnasium buzzed with the usual chaos of a morning assembly. Metal chairs squeaked against the polished floor as students shuffled into rows, their chatter echoing off the high ceiling. Jacob sat awkwardly in the back row, his work boots and oil-stained jeans standing out among the other parents' business attire. He hadn't planned to be here, but the principal's call had been insistent, just a regular assembly, Ethan had said that morning, confused when Jacob mentioned taking time off work to attend. Now, watching his son fidget nervously in the front row with the other students, Jacob wondered if Ethan truly hadn't known. Principal Matthews stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice. The feedback made everyone wince. "Good morning, Franklin High," she began, her voice warm but commanding. "Today, we're here to recognize someone special in our community." Jacob noticed Ethan's shoulders tense. His son had always hated being the center of attention. "Sometimes," Principal Matthews continued, "the greatest acts of heroism happen quietly, without fanfare or recognition. We have a student among us who has been spending his evenings doing something extraordinary." The crowd of students grew still, curiosity replacing their usual restlessness. Jacob's heart swelled with pride, even as his hands gripped his knees anxiously. "Ethan Miller, would you please come to the stage?" A collective murmur rippled through the gymnasium. Ethan turned bright red but stood slowly, making his way to the stage. His worn sneakers, the ones Jacob had finally been able to replace, squeaked slightly with each step. For the past year, Principal Matthews announced, Ethan has been volunteering at the Community Crisis Hotline. In that time, he has helped countless people through their darkest moments. Last month, his compassion and wisdom quite literally saved a life. Jacob watched his son's face, saw the mix of embarrassment and quiet pride there. He thought of the stranger with the briefcase, of the desperate gratitude in his eyes that rainy night. Mrs. Chin from the Crisis Center stepped forward, her small frame nearly lost behind the podium. When Ethan first came to volunteer, I wasn't sure about having someone so young on the phones, she admitted. But his gift for listening, for finding the right words when people need them most, has been remarkable. Ethan stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking so much like his mother in that moment that Jacob's chest ached. Sarah had always known exactly what to say to comfort others too. One night last month, Mrs. Chin continued, Ethan spoke to someone who had lost all hope. For 2 hours, he listened, shared, and ultimately convinced this person that their life had value. That caller later reached out to tell us that without Ethan's words that night, they wouldn't be here today. The gymnasium had grown completely silent. Jacob could see students looking at Ethan with new eyes, perhaps realizing for the first time that the quiet boy who sat next to them in math class was capable of such profound impact. For his dedication, compassion, and life-saving service, Principal Matthews said, we present Ethan with the Franklin High Community Service Award. She handed Ethan a small plaque. He accepted it with trembling hands, looking smaller than usual under the bright gymnasium lights. Would you like to say a few words? Principal Matthews asked gently. Ethan stepped to the microphone, clearing his throat. He started, then paused, taking a deep breath. I started volunteering because my mom always said that sometimes people just need someone to listen, that everyone deserves to be heard. His voice grew stronger. You never know what someone's going through. Sometimes a small act of kindness can change everything. The first person to stand was Tommy Sanders, the boy whose family van Jacob had helped fix. Then Sarah Williams, whose mother's medical bills had mysteriously been paid. One by one, students and teachers rose to their feet, applause building like thunder in the gymnasium. Jacob stood too, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He saw Ethan searching the crowd until their eyes met. In that moment, father and son shared a look of understanding. About the briefcase, about the choices they'd made, about the ripples of kindness spreading through their community. After the assembly, they walked together to Jacob's truck in the parking lot. Ethan clutched his plaque, still looking dazed. Did you know about this? He asked. Jacob shook his head. Principal Matthews just said I should come. I'm proud of you, son. Your mother would be too. Ethan's smile was soft but genuine. Thanks, Dad. He glanced at the plaque. I didn't do it for recognition, though. I just wanted to help. I know, Jacob said, pulling him into a quick, rough hug. That's what makes it even more special. They were almost to the truck when Jacob's steps faltered. Across the street, partially hidden in the shadow of the coffee shop, stood 2 men in dark suits. They weren't moving, weren't speaking, just watching. Jacob recognized them from the diner, felt the weight of their stares like ice down his spine. Get in the truck, Ethan, he said quietly, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. He waited until his son was safely inside before walking around to the driver's side, feeling those eyes on him every step of the way. As he started the engine, Jacob glanced in the rearview mirror. The men remained motionless, their presence a silent warning that this moment of triumph might be shorter-lived than he'd hoped. The clock on Jacob's kitchen wall ticked past 11. He sat at the table, paper spread before him, tracking the money they'd quietly distributed throughout town. The house was silent, except for the occasional creaks of the old wooden floors and Ethan's soft snoring from upstairs. A sharp rap at the door made Jacob's heart skip. He froze, pen hovering over his notepad. The knock came again, more urgent this time. Rising slowly, he moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. His breath caught in his throat. The stranger from that stormy night stood on his porch, but he was barely recognizable. His once neat appearance had deteriorated completely. A dark bruise bloomed across his left cheekbone, and his suit was torn and dirty. He kept glancing over his shoulder into the darkness. Jacob's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. Common sense told him to leave it locked, to call the police, but something in the man's desperate expression made him hesitate. After a moment's internal struggle, he opened the door. Please, the stranger whispered hoarsely, I have to warn you. Jacob stepped back, allowing him inside. Under the kitchen light, the stranger looked even worse. His lip was split, and dried blood stained his collar. He collapsed into a kitchen chair, shaking. I should have told you everything from the start, he said, running trembling fingers through his disheveled hair. The money. It wasn't mine to give. Jacob's stomach clenched. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his mouth go dry. Where did it come from? My former employer, Richard Crane. The stranger's voice cracked. He owns half the businesses in the next county. Everyone thinks he's a respected businessman, but it's all a facade. The money in that briefcase? It's evidence of his crimes. Payoffs, bribes, blackmail. Jacob sank into the chair across from him. Why did you take it? I was his accountant. I saw everything, the corruption, the people he ruined. The stranger's eyes darted to the window. I couldn't take it anymore. When your son talked to me that night on the hotline, he made me realize I had to do something. So I grabbed the briefcase and ran. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen walls. The stranger flinched violently. Crane's looking for me. For the money. He's got people everywhere. Private security, corrupt cops on his payroll. His voice dropped to a whisper. I thought giving it away would protect me somehow. Make it disappear. But he won't stop until he gets it back. Jacob thought of the men in suits he'd seen around town. His blood ran cold. These people who are looking, they're dangerous, Mr. Miller. Crane doesn't care who gets hurt. The stranger gripped the edge of the table. I've seen what happens to people who cross him. You and your son need to... A dog barked somewhere down the street. The stranger jerked to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. He's close. Too close. Panic filled his eyes. I shouldn't have come. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Wait. Jacob reached for him. Tell me what to do. How do we fix this? But the stranger was already backing toward the door. They can't know I was here. Protect your son, Mr. Miller. Whatever happens, protect your son. Before Jacob could stop him, the stranger yanked open the door and disappeared into the darkness. Jacob rushed to the porch, but the man was already gone, leaving only footprints in the dewy grass. Standing in the doorway, Jacob felt the weight of every dollar they'd given away, every good deed that now seemed tainted. The quiet neighborhood suddenly felt menacing. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every passing car could carry Crane's men. He closed and locked the door with shaking hands. Upstairs, Ethan still slept peacefully, unaware of the danger closing in around them. Jacob leaned against the wall, his mind racing. The stranger's warning echoed in his head. Protect your son. Time was running out, and Jacob had no idea how to save his family from the storm that was coming. Looking at his cramped notes on the kitchen table, the careful accounting of their anonymous generosity, Jacob realized with crushing clarity that their brief season of hope was about to end. The money that had seemed like a miracle now felt like a ticking bomb in their hands. His gaze fell on Ethan's school photo, magnetized to the refrigerator. His son's smile, so much like his mother's, stared back at him. The same smile that had grown brighter these past weeks as their lives had improved. The same smile that had apparently saved a desperate man's life through a late-night phone call. The clock ticked past midnight. Jacob stared at his own reflection in the dark kitchen window, seeing the lines of worry etched deeper than ever on his tired face. For a moment, he caught a glimpse of movement in the street beyond, or maybe it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. Either way, the message was clear. They were running out of time. The kitchen light cast a dim glow as Jacob stared at the worn bills spread across the table. His calloused fingers traced the edges of each stack, the money that had brought both salvation and danger to their doorstep. Outside, crickets chirped in the darkness, a peaceful sound that felt wrong against the turmoil in his chest. We have to give it back, Jacob said quietly, more to himself than to Ethan, who sat across from him. There's no other way. Ethan's chair scraped against the linoleum as he leaned forward. Dad, we can't. Think about everything we've done with it. Mrs. Peterson's cancer treatments, Tommy's mom keeping their house, the new books at school. I know, son. Jacob's voice was heavy with exhaustion. But this money, it's blood money. Those men in suits, they're not playing games. And now that stranger shows up looking like he went 10 rounds in a boxing match? He shook his head. We're in over our heads. But we didn't steal it, Ethan protested, his teenage voice cracking with emotion. That man gave it to us. He chose to give it to us because you saved his life, Jacob finished. I know, and I'm proud of you for that, more than you'll ever know. But his gratitude doesn't change where this money came from. The refrigerator hummed in the background as silence fell between them. Jacob looked around their small kitchen at the worn countertops they'd finally been able to repair, the new microwave that had replaced their broken one, the stack of paid bills by the phone. All of it felt like a dream about to shatter. If we give it back, Ethan said slowly, we'll lose everything. The house, the repairs, maybe even your job if you can't afford gas to get there. His eyes glistened. Is that what Mom would want? Jacob's chest tightened at the mention of his late wife. Don't use her like that. I'm not using her, Ethan insisted, standing up. His voice grew stronger. I'm remembering what she always told us, that doing good matters more than having things. We've helped so many people, Dad. Real people, not just numbers on bills. Jacob watched his son pace the kitchen, seeing so much of his mother in him, the same fierce compassion, the unwavering belief in doing right. The money wasn't ours to give, Ethan, no matter how we used it, but we made it ours. Ethan turned, his face flushed with conviction. Every time we helped someone, every time we made things better, we earned it. That corrupt businessman, he was just hoarding it, hurting people. We turned his greed into something good. Despite himself, Jacob felt a flutter of pride at his son's words. The boy who once hid behind video games now stood before him, arguing for justice and kindness with a passion that reminded him why they'd started helping others in the first place. Remember Mr. Collins at church? Ethan continued, gaining momentum. He was going to lose his farm after 40 years. His whole family would have been homeless. But because of us, because we helped his grandkids still have a home, his daughter can still go to college. Jacob rubbed his temples. And what happens when these men come after us? After you? I can't risk. We can't live in fear, Ethan cut in. You always taught me that running away doesn't solve problems. Well, giving this money back? That's running away. From everything good we've done, from everything we could still do. The truth in his son's words stung. Jacob looked at the money again, remembering the faces of those they'd helped. The widow whose grief counseling they'd paid for, the young mother whose car repairs had saved her job, the elderly couple who could finally afford their medications. Maybe, Jacob started, his resolve wavering. Maybe we could. A sudden crash shattered the moment. Glass exploded inward from the living room window, sending shards skittering across the floor. Ethan yelped, and Jacob instinctively grabbed his son, pulling him away from the kitchen doorway. Stay back, Jacob ordered, his heart pounding. He crept toward the living room, where a brick lay amid the broken glass. A piece of paper was wrapped around it, secured with a rubber band. With trembling fingers, Jacob unwrapped the note. The message was typed in bold letters that seemed to scream off the page. Return what's ours, or else. He turned to find Ethan standing in the kitchen doorway, face pale but determined. The brick in Jacob's hand felt as heavy as their decision, the jagged edges cutting into his palm like the choice they now faced. The first rays of morning sunlight crept across the driveway as Jacob stepped outside, his work boots crunching on loose gravel. The air felt heavy with morning dew, but something else too, a thickness that made the hair on his neck stand up. He reached for his truck keys, then froze mid-step. His old pickup sat wounded in the driveway. All 4 tires were slashed, deep cuts splitting the rubber like broken smiles. Crude words had been scratched into the faded blue paint. Last warning. The driver's side mirror hung by a wire, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Jacob's hands trembled as he touched the scarred metal. This truck had been his lifeline, carrying him to both jobs, keeping food on their table. Now it sat crippled, a message he couldn't ignore. Movement caught his eye, a dark sedan crawling past their house for the 3rd time this morning. The windows were tinted, but Jacob could feel eyes watching, measuring his reaction. His stomach churned. Dad? Ethan's voice came from the front door. What's wrong? Stay inside, Jacob called back, trying to keep his voice steady. But Ethan was already crossing the yard, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The boy's face fell as he saw the damage. They did this because of the money, didn't they? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Jacob nodded, pulling his son away from the truck. We need to get you to school another way. I'll call Mrs. Henderson next door. Dad, we can't just pretend this isn't happening. Ethan's eyes held that same determined look his mother used to have. They're not going to stop. Inside the house, Jacob paced the kitchen while Ethan sat at the table, neither touching their breakfast. The brick from last night still lay on the counter, its threatening note now joined by this morning's vandalism. The walls seemed to close in around them. Maybe we should call the police, Ethan suggested. Jacob shook his head. And tell them what? That we took money we knew wasn't ours? Used it all over town? His voice cracked. They'd arrest me, and you'd end up in foster care. But we did good things with it. We helped people. The law doesn't care about good intentions, son. Jacob sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy. And these people, they're not the type to let the police stop them. The sound of another car passing made them both tense. Jacob moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. The same dark sedan. His heart pounded against his ribs. "We need to leave," he said suddenly. "Pack a bag, just essentials." Ethan stood, panic flashing across his face. "Leave? But what about school? My friends? The house? None of that matters if we're not safe." Jacob's voice came out harder than he meant it to. He softened his tone. "I'm sorry, son, but I've seen how these things go. They're watching us, sending messages. Next time, it won't be just the truck." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't volunteered at the hotline..." "Stop." Jacob crossed the room and gripped his son's shoulders. "You saved that man's life. Never apologize for showing kindness. But now, I might get you killed." Ethan's voice broke. The words hit Jacob like physical blows. His son's face, usually so bright with hope, was twisted with fear and guilt. In that moment, Jacob saw not the teenager before him, but the small boy who'd cried himself to sleep after his mother's funeral, believing somehow he was to blame for her illness. Jacob pulled Ethan into a tight hug, feeling his son's shoulders shake with silent sobs. The morning sun cast their shadow on the kitchen wall, a single, merged silhouette of father and son. All their dreams of a fresh start, of helping others, of making something good from their struggles, seemed to crumble around them. "I promised your mother I'd keep you safe," Jacob whispered into his son's hair, his own tears finally breaking free. "And I don't know if I can anymore." The old wooden doors of St. Mary's Church creaked as Jacob slipped inside. Early morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across empty pews. The church smelled of wood polish and ancient hymnals, familiar and comforting from his childhood days. Jacob's footsteps echoed in the quiet sanctuary as he made his way to the front. His shoulders felt heavy, weighed down by sleepless nights and constant worry. Settling into the front pew, he leaned forward, clasped his weathered hands together, and closed his tired eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Sarah, I wish you were here. You always knew the right path." A tear rolled down his cheek as he thought of his late wife. The wooden cross above the altar seemed to watch over him, patient and eternal. Sunlight caught the brass collection plate they'd helped pay for with the mysterious money, making it gleam like a reminder. "I tried to do right by the money," Jacob continued, his voice barely audible. "We helped so many people. The Wilson family's medical bills, Tommy's college fund, the church roof." He rubbed his calloused hands across his face. "But now Ethan's in danger. Our boy's in danger, Sarah." The morning silence wrapped around him like a blanket. Through the windows, he could hear birds beginning their morning songs, the world waking up to another day. Jacob sat up straighter, something shifting in his chest. "I can't keep running," he realized aloud. "Can't keep looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next threat. That's no life for Ethan." Mrs. Martinez, the elderly cleaning lady, quietly entered the church with her mop and bucket. She nodded respectfully at Jacob, but kept her distance, sensing his need for solitude. The familiar sounds of her work provided a gentle backdrop to his thoughts. Jacob's mind wandered to the police station downtown. Officer Kelly, who'd helped when kids were vandalizing the garage last year. The FBI office in the city, just an hour's drive away. They'd know what to do about corrupt businessmen and dirty money. "Maybe that's the answer," he murmured, looking up at the cross. "Maybe we need to trust in something bigger than ourselves." The idea began to take shape in his mind. They had evidence. The briefcase itself, the threatening note thrown through their window, witnesses who'd seen the mysterious men in suits. And somewhere out there, that desperate stranger who'd started it all might be willing to testify. Jacob pushed himself to his feet, his knees cracking from sitting too long. His back felt straighter now, the weight on his shoulders lighter. Mrs. Martinez looked up from her mopping, offering a gentle smile. "Bless you, Mr. Miller," she said softly. "Thank you, Rosa," he replied, managing a small smile in return. Sometimes we just need a quiet place to think. The drive home seemed shorter than usual, purpose replacing fear in his heart. He found Ethan in the kitchen, making toast and coffee, breakfast duties he'd taken over since things got bad. The boy looked up as Jacob entered, dark circles under his eyes matching his father's. "You were gone early," Ethan said, sliding a coffee mug across the counter. Jacob wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, gathering his thoughts. "I went to church," he said finally. "Been doing a lot of thinking." Ethan sat down across from him, waiting. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking each precious moment. "Son, I think we need to go to the authorities," Jacob said, meeting Ethan's eyes. "Tell them everything. About the stranger, the money, those men watching us. All of it." He expected argument or fear, but Ethan's face showed only relief. "Really? It's not right. Us living like this. Looking over our shoulders. Jumping at shadows? Jacob took a deep breath. Your mother would want us to do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. The money's already done good, Dad. Whatever happens now, we know that. All those people we helped. But we can't hide anymore, Jacob added softly. Dad, we can't hide anymore, Ethan agreed, straightening in his chair. We need to be brave. Those simple words, spoken with such conviction, confirmed everything Jacob had felt in the church. They would face this together, father and son, standing up to do what was right. The morning sun streamed through their kitchen window, warming their faces, promising a new day and a chance to make things right. The old wooden doors of St. Mary's Church creaked as Jacob slipped inside. Early morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across empty pews. The church smelled of wood polish and ancient hymnals, familiar and comforting from his childhood days. Pastor Daniel sat in his usual spot near the altar, head bowed in morning prayer. He looked up as Jacob's footsteps echoed through the empty church, a warm smile spreading across his weathered face. Jacob Miller, you're here mighty early, the pastor said, his deep voice carrying across the quiet space. Jacob's hands trembled as he slid into the front pew. Pastor, I need help. I've gotten myself and Ethan into something bigger than us. The pastor's smile faded, replaced by concern. He moved to sit beside Jacob, his presence steady and reassuring. Tell me everything, son. And Jacob did. The words poured out like a flood. The mysterious stranger, the briefcase full of money, their attempts to help the community, and now the threats. His voice cracked when he described the brick through their window, the fear in Ethan's eyes. Pastor Daniels listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When Jacob finished, the pastor was quiet for a long moment. You've carried this burden alone for too long, he finally said, placing a gentle hand on Jacob's shoulder. It's time to share it. But who can we trust? Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah Wheeler from the crisis hotline where Ethan volunteers? She's as solid as they come. And Tom Martinez, the retired police officer who lives on Oak Street. He's helped with the church's security for years. Pastor Daniels paused thoughtfully. And we should talk to Martha Kennedy. That woman's been running the town newspaper for 30 years. She knows every skeleton and every closet within 50 miles. Jacob's chest tightened. Telling more people feels dangerous. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is facing evil alone, Pastor Daniels replied firmly. Give me an hour to get them here. True to his word. Within the hour, 3 more concerned faces joined them in the pastor's study. Sarah Wheeler, with her kind eyes and silver hair, sat straight-backed in an armchair. Tom Martinez leaned against the wall, his cop instincts clearly still sharp as his eyes darted between speakers. Martha Kennedy perched on the edge of her seat, her reporter's notebook ready. Once again, Jacob told his story. This time, it felt different, like sharing the weight of a heavy load. When he described how they'd used the money to help others, Sarah wiped away tears. When he mentioned the threats, Tom's jaw clenched visibly. So that's why Mrs. Peterson's medical bills disappeared. Martha mused, her pen moving rapidly across her notebook. And the mysterious church roof repairs. It all makes sense now. The question is, Tom said, pushing off from the wall, who's this businessman? These kinds of tactics, vandalism, threats, they're meant to isolate you, make you feel helpless. Sarah leaned forward. Jacob, what you and Ethan did with that money, you transformed lives. The Wilson family would have lost their home without that anonymous rent payment. Little Amy Thompson got her surgery. You turned something corrupt into pure good. But now they're in danger. Pastor Daniels reminded them gently. We need to act. Martha stopped writing and looked up. I've been investigating corporate corruption in this region for years. A businessman with this kind of money and these tactics? I have my suspicions. Give me a description of the stranger, and I bet I can connect the dots. Jacob described the man in detail, his height, the way he moved, the peculiar scar on his right hand. Martha's eyes widened with recognition. That sounds like David Chen, former CFO of Riverside Industries, she said. He disappeared 3 months ago after allegedly discovering financial irregularities. The CEO, Richard Maxwell, claimed Chen had embezzled funds, but my sources suggested Chen had evidence of Maxwell's illegal activities. Tom nodded slowly. Maxwell's got a reputation. Nothing ever sticks to him because people are too scared to testify. Until now, Pastor Daniels said firmly. Jacob, you've got something he wants, and more importantly, you've got witnesses to how that money was used. We've got Martha's investigative work, Tom's law enforcement experience, and a whole community that's been touched by your generosity. Sarah reached over and squeezed Jacob's hand. You're not alone anymore. We'll stand with you. The FBI has been trying to build a case against Maxwell for years, Tom added. With Chin's money trail, Martha's research, and our testimonies about the threats, we could give them what they need. Jacob looked around the room at these people, pillars of the community he'd known for years but never truly leaned on. Their determination filled him with a strength he hadn't felt in a long time. What do we do first? He asked. I'll contact my sources at the FBI, Tom said, pulling out his phone. They'll want to move fast once they hear what we have. Martha was already flipping through her notebook. I've got 3 years of notes on Maxwell's operations. Time to organize them properly. I'll gather statements from the families you've helped, Sarah offered. Anonymous or not, people know something changed in this town. They'll want to protect that. Pastor Daniels smiled. And I'll make sure you and Ethan are safe until the authorities arrive. The church has some secure rooms where you can stay. For the first time since finding the briefcase, Jacob felt the knot in his chest begin to loosen. These people, his neighbors, his friends, were willing to risk everything to stand beside him and Ethan, to protect not just them, but the good they'd managed to do with money meant for evil. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Tom made calls from the pastor's office while Martha spread her research across 3 tables, creating a timeline of Maxwell's suspicious activities. Sarah worked the phones, quietly reaching out to families who'd received help, gathering their stories. Jacob watched them work, overwhelmed by their dedication. When Pastor Daniels handed him a cup of coffee, he could barely hold back tears. You know what Ethan said to me this morning? Jacob said softly. He said we needed to be brave. I thought that meant facing this alone, but he was wiser than that. Real bravery is letting others help you fight. Your boy's got his mother's heart, Pastor Daniels replied with a gentle smile. And her wisdom too. By noon, they'd assembled a formidable case. Tom's FBI contact was driving up from the city. Martha's evidence filled 2 boxes. Sarah had statements from 12 families. The pieces were falling into place, transforming their small group into something powerful, a community united against corruption. Gray clouds loomed over Main Street as Jacob walked from the bank, his shoulders tense. He'd just withdrawn the last of the money they'd hidden away. His weathered hands clutched a manila envelope, knuckles white with strain. The usual morning bustle of their small town felt different today, heavier, like the air before a storm. A black SUV pulled up beside him. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs as 2 men in dark suits stepped out. He recognized them from the diner, the ones who'd been asking questions. The taller one, with a scar across his jaw, spoke first. Mr. Miller. His voice was sandpaper rough. Our employer would like his property back. Jacob clutched the envelope tighter. I don't know what you're talking about. The second man, shorter but broader, moved to block Jacob's path. Don't play dumb. The briefcase. Now. People hurried past, heads down, pretending not to notice. Jacob's throat went dry as he glanced around. The street suddenly felt very empty. Last chance, Scarjaw said, taking a step closer. Hand it over, and this ends quietly. He's not alone. The voice came from behind Jacob. Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the corner grocery, stood there with her arms crossed. Her tiny frame somehow filled the sidewalk. Leave him be. The men exchanged glances. The shorter one laughed. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. Tom Watson, the hardware store owner, stepped out of his shop. His thick arms were stained with paint. Jacob helped my family when we couldn't afford Emily's medicine. Whatever's going on here, he's got our support. More voices joined in. Sarah from the diner. Old Mr. Peterson from the barber shop. Coach Williams from the high school. One by one, they emerged from shops and parked cars, forming a circle around Jacob. That man you work for? Sarah said, her voice sharp as nails. He's been bleeding this town dry for years, buying up properties, raising rents until families can't afford to stay. But Jacob, Mr. Peterson added, he's been doing the opposite, helping folks keep their homes, fixing what's broken. The shorter man reached inside his jacket. This isn't some small-town fairy tale. Move aside. No. The word came from everywhere at once. The crowd grew larger. Miss Thompson from the library, the Martinez family, even old Bill from the gas station, who rarely spoke to anyone. Jacob felt warmth spread through his chest. These were his neighbors, people he'd known his whole life, people who'd watched Ethan grow up, people whose lives had been touched by the money they'd used for good. Your boss? Jacob said, finding his voice at last. "He thinks money is power, but he's wrong. This," he gestured to the gathering crowd, "this is real power. Community, people looking out for each other." Scarjaw's face darkened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," came a new voice, "I believe we do." Pastor Daniels walked forward, holding up his phone. "The FBI has been very interested in the evidence we've gathered. The paper trail of corruption, the threats, all of it." The shorter man cursed and grabbed his partner's arm. In the distance, sirens began to wail. "It's over," Jacob said quietly. Red and blue lights flashed at both ends of the street. The men bolted for their SUV, but police cars had already blocked both exits. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. "FBI, freeze!" The crowd parted as agents and windbreakers moved in. The two men raised their hands, faces twisted with fury. Behind them, another set of officers led a handcuffed figure from a second vehicle, a well-dressed man Jacob recognized from newspaper photos. The corrupt businessman himself, finally exposed. The sirens faded to a distant whine as the cars pulled away. Jacob stood there, surrounded by his neighbors, feeling the weight of fear finally lift from his shoulders. These people, this community, had become his shield, his strength, his family. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed his arm. "We take care of our own," she said simply. Tom Watson clapped him on the back. "Always have, always will." One by one, they drifted back to their shops and homes, leaving Jacob standing in the morning Sunday. The manila envelope in his hands no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like possibility, like hope made real through the power of community and courage. The clouds above began to break, letting streams of sunlight paint the street in gold. For the first time in weeks, Jacob could breathe freely, knowing that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what you have, but from who stands beside you when you need them most. The police evidence room felt cold and sterile as Jacob watched them catalog the contents of the briefcase. Each stack of bills disappeared into manila envelopes, tagged and sealed. Detective Morris, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, handled the process with gentle efficiency. "I know this isn't easy, Mr. Miller," she said, writing on a form, "but you did the right thing." Jacob nodded, his throat tight. Ethan stood beside him, their shoulders touching. The boy hadn't left his father's side since they'd turned in the money that morning. "All that good we did," Jacob whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Gone just like that." Ethan squeezed his father's arm. "Not gone, Dad. Look at Mrs. Thompson's new roof. Look at little Tommy Watson, he can hear now with his cochlear implant. That's still there. Nobody can take that away." Jacob glanced at his son, seeing his late wife's wisdom shining in those young eyes. A warmth spread through his chest, easing the ache of loss. Outside the police station, they found Pastor Mike waiting by his old station wagon. "Need a ride home?" he asked, jingling his keys. The drive back was quiet, but not uncomfortable. As they turned onto Cedar Street, Jacob noticed something unusual. Cars lined both sides of the road near their house. People milled about on their front lawn. "What's going on?" he asked, sitting up straighter. Pastor Mike smiled mysteriously and pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door hurried over as they stepped out, carrying her famous chicken casserole. Behind her, Mr. Chen from the hardware store held a box of tools. Sarah Williams, whose medical bills they'd helped pay, clutched an envelope in her trembling hands. "We heard what you did," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes glistening. "Both with the money and standing up to those criminals." More neighbors approached, faces Jacob recognized from around town. Some he'd helped directly with the money, others he barely knew, but they all wore the same expression of gratitude and determination. Tom Watson pushed through the crowd, his 7-year-old son Tommy perched on his shoulders. The boy's new cochlear implant caught the afternoon Sunday. "When we heard they were taking the money back," Tom said, "we got together. Everyone pitched in what they could." Sarah Williams stepped forward, holding out the envelope. "It's not as much as what was in that briefcase," she said softly, "but it's from all of us, to help you keep your house." Jacob's hand shook as he accepted the envelope. Inside, he found checks, cash, and handwritten notes of thanks. His vision blurred with tears. "We take care of our own," Mr. Chin declared, setting down his toolbox. "And your family now, both of you." More people arrived, carrying dishes of food and envelopes. Mrs. Peterson brought her famous apple pie. The high school principal came with news of a scholarship fund started in Ethan's name, honoring his work at the crisis hotline. Even gruff old Mr. Harrison, who rarely left his house, showed up with a jar full of saved coins. They set up tables in the yard, sharing food and stories. Children played on the lawn while adults discussed plans to help repair Jacob's house. The Watson kids chased each other around the oak tree, Tommy's laughter ringing clear and true, a sound that would have been impossible without the Millers' help. Ethan moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and thanks with humble grace. Jacob watched his son, seeing not just the boy who had saved a stranger's life, but a young man who had helped transform their entire community. Pastor Mike touched Jacob's shoulder. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes the greatest miracles aren't in the grand gestures, but in how they ripple through people's hearts." Jacob looked around his yard at the faces of neighbors, become family, at the simple abundance of casseroles and pies, at the envelopes containing not just money, but love and gratitude. The loss of the briefcase's contents seemed smaller now, overshadowed by something far more valuable. Mrs. Rodriguez organized a line of people bringing food into the kitchen, turning it into an impromptu potluck. The aroma of home-cooked meals filled the house that had felt so empty just days before. Children darted between adults' legs, playing tag and giggling. Even the old house seemed to stand a little straighter, warmed by the presence of so many caring souls. Sarah Williams had started a list of home repairs needed, with neighbors signing up for different tasks. Mr. Chin was already examining the loose porch railing, muttering about having the right tools in his truck. The community's determination to help shone in every offered casserole, every scribbled note, every warm embrace. As the afternoon sun painted the sky in soft golds and pinks, Jacob found Ethan sitting on the porch steps, taking in the scene before them. He sat down beside his son, their shoulders touching just as they had in the police station. "You okay, Dad?" Ethan asked. Jacob looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not just his boy, but his hero. "You know what, son? I think I'm better than okay." He gestured to the crowd in their yard. "This right here? This is worth more than any amount of money in that briefcase." The Watson kids ran past, Tommy's cochlear implant catching the light as he played with his friends, his laughter clear and musical. Mrs. Rodriguez called out that dinner was ready, and the crowd began to move toward the tables laden with food. Their small house had never felt so full of life, so rich with possibility. The briefcase was gone, but what remained was something that couldn't be contained in any container, couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. It lived in the warmth of shared meals, in the strength of joined hands, in the laughter of children who could now hear, and in the hearts of people who had learned that miracles often wore the simple disguise of neighbors helping neighbors. Jacob and Ethan stood up together, ready to join their newfound family for dinner. The porch step creaked beneath them, a sound that now promised repair rather than decay. Their home might be humble, but it had become the heart of something extraordinary. A community bound together by gratitude, grace, and the enduring power of small kindnesses turned into lasting change. The community center buzzed with activity on Saturday afternoon. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, and mason jars filled with wildflowers dotted the folding tables. Hand-drawn signs reading "Thank you, Miller Family" decorated the walls. The smell of home-cooked dishes filled the air. Mrs. Henderson's famous apple pie, Mr. Garcia's spicy chili, and countless casseroles brought by caring neighbors. Jacob shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair on stage, his work-worn hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Beside him, Ethan sat straight-backed, occasionally offering his father reassuring smiles. Pastor Robert stepped up to the microphone, his warm voice carrying across the packed room. "Today, we gather to celebrate two extraordinary members of our community. Jacob and Ethan Miller showed us what it means to live with courage and compassion." Sarah Thompson, the elderly widow from down the street, was the first to speak. Her walker clicked against the wooden floor as she made her way to the microphone. "When my rent was due and my Social Security check hadn't arrived, an envelope appeared under my door." Her voice quavered. "Inside was exactly what I needed. I never knew it was you, Jacob, until now." Jacob ducked his head, remembering the night he'd slipped that envelope under her door. He'd seen her crying on her porch that afternoon. Little Tommy Martinez's mother spoke next, clutching a tissue, the anonymous donation that paid for Tommy's surgery. She wiped her eyes. "My boy can walk now because of you, Mr. Miller." One by one, townspeople stood to share their stories. The high school principal spoke about the mysterious check that funded new textbooks. The church treasurer described how the roof repair had saved their historic building. Each story pieced together the quiet acts of kindness that had transformed their community. Miss Chen from the crisis hotline stood up, her small frame radiating pride. And let's not forget young Ethan, whose compassionate words saved a desperate man's life. Like father, like son, both heroes in their own way. Jacob felt Ethan's hand slip into his, His son's palm was warm and steady, so different from the frightened boy who'd hidden under his covers during thunderstorms just a few years ago. Mayor Wilson took the stage, holding up a large envelope. When we learned what the Millers were facing, this community didn't hesitate. We've raised enough to help them keep their home and start fresh. He turned to Jacob. You gave without expecting anything in return. Now it's our turn. The envelope contained checks, cash, and pledges from nearly every family in town. Some had given $5, others $500, each according to what they could spare. Jacob stared at the contents, his vision blurring. Mrs. Baker, who ran the local diner, stood up next. Jacob Miller has been having coffee at my counter for 15 years. Never once complained about his troubles. Just asked how my day was going and left extra-large tips when he could barely afford his own meal. The school janitor, Mr. Peterson, spoke about how Jacob had fixed his car for free when times were tough. The librarian mentioned anonymous donations of new children's books. Each story revealed another thread in the tapestry of quiet kindness Jacob had woven through their town. Katie Sullivan, a teenage girl with braces, approached the microphone shyly. Ethan talked to me on the crisis hotline one night. He didn't know it was me, but she took a deep breath. His words made me feel less alone. He said everyone matters, even when they don't believe it themselves. Jacob squeezed Ethan's hand, pride swelling in his chest. His son had inherited his mother's gift for healing hearts with words. The mayor returned to the microphone. The money you received and shared did more than pay bills or fix roofs. It showed us what we could be when we look out for each other. Spontaneously, people began standing up, applauding. The sound swelled until it filled the community center, echoing off the walls. Jacob saw tears on many faces, not of sadness, but of joy and gratitude. Ethan suddenly stood up, touching his father's shoulder before walking to the microphone. The applause quieted as he adjusted the stand to his height. His voice, though soft, carried clearly through the room. We didn't save lives with money, Ethan said, looking out at the gathered faces. We saved them with hope. The late summer breeze carried the sweet scent of freshly cut grass across the Millers' front yard. Their porch, now sporting a fresh coat of white paint and new floorboards, creaked softly under their rocking chairs. Jacob watched as golden sunlight painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, while Ethan sat beside him, both holding glasses of cold lemonade that sweated in the evening warmth. The house behind them stood proud and secure, a far cry from the shabby structure it had been just months ago. New shutters hung straight and true, the sagging gutters had been replaced, and bright flowers bloomed in window boxes Ethan had built himself in woodshop class. But more than the physical repairs, it was what the house represented now that mattered most: hope, community, and the strength of doing what's right. Jacob glanced at his son, marveling at how much older and wiser Ethan seemed these days. The boy, no young man, had grown inches taller since spring, but it wasn't just his height that had changed. There was a quiet confidence in his bearing now, a gentle strength that reminded Jacob so much of his late wife that it made his heart ache with pride. Mrs. Henderson dropped off another pie this morning, Ethan said, taking a sip of his lemonade. That's the third one this week. Jacob chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Pretty soon we'll have to start jogging just to keep up with all the food people keep bringing over. I like it, Ethan admitted. Not just the food, though her pies are amazing, but how everyone stops to talk now. Remember how quiet it used to be here? Jacob nodded, remembering the lonely evenings when they'd hurried from car to house, too wrapped up in their struggles to notice their neighbors. Now, the street hummed with life. Children played hopscotch on the sidewalk, couples walked their dogs in the cooling evening air, and friendly waves were exchanged like currency. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After the drama with the briefcase and the corrupt businessman had settled, the community had rallied around them in ways Jacob never could have imagined. The fundraiser had been just the beginning. People showed up with tools and supplies, offering their time and skills to help repair the house. The local hardware store provided materials at cost. Even the bank had worked with them to refinance their mortgage at better terms. Dad, Ethan said softly, do you ever wonder about him? The stranger who brought the briefcase? Jacob set his glass down on the small table between their chairs. Sometimes. The police never did find him after everything went down. But wherever he is, I hope he knows what his act started, even if the money wasn't exactly clean. We made it clean though, didn't we? Ethan's voice held a touch of pride. All those people we helped. That we did, son. Jacob smiled, remembering the faces of those whose lives they'd touched. The widow who'd kept her house, the kids who got new books at school, the church congregation gathering under a solid roof. Though I have to admit, for a while there, I thought we'd lose everything. Ethan turned to face his father, his expression serious. But we didn't. We gained everything instead. The truth of those words settled over them like a comfortable blanket. The street had grown quiet as the sun dipped lower, painting the clouds in deep purples and blues. One by one, stars began to peek through the darkening sky, twinkling like distant diamonds. Jacob watched as his son leaned back in his chair, looking up at the emerging constellations. The boy who used to hide in his room playing video games now volunteered 3 days a week at the crisis hotline. The same quiet voice that had once barely spoke above a whisper had found its strength in helping others find their way through dark times. The porch light clicked on automatically, another small repair that had seemed impossible months ago, casting a warm glow around them. A moth fluttered nearby, dancing in the light, as crickets began their evening chorus. Jacob felt something shift in his chest, a fullness that had been growing steadily over these past months. It wasn't just about having a secure home or knowing the bills would be paid. It was about rediscovering who they were as father and son, as members of a community, as people who could make a difference. He thought about that stormy night when a desperate stranger had knocked on their door, how close they'd come to turning away from the responsibility that came with his gift. The money was long gone now, given back or given away, but its true value had never been in the dollars themselves. The stars multiplied overhead as darkness settled in properly. A cool evening breeze rustled the leaves of the old maple tree in their yard, the same tree that had seemed ready to fall on the house last winter, but now stood strong after proper care and attention. Jacob reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder gently. Ethan turned to him, his young face open and peaceful in the porch light. The moment felt right, perfect even, for what Jacob had been wanting to say for weeks now. "Son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just save that man's life. You saved mine too." Ethan's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. Father and son sat together in comfortable silence, watching as more stars appeared in the velvet sky above them.